Thanks so much for joining us today. As we continue to plug through the Gospel of Luke, we are getting closer to the end. In fact, we start chapter 21. So if you have Bibles at home or wherever you're listening, if you want to jump to Luke chapter 21, we're going to be in the first 4 verses today. It's important to realize, though, what we've come out of. We've come out of a huge interaction between Jesus and the religious leaders. It happened within the temple courts, and it happened over the course of a few hours where the Pharisees sent multiple groups of people to try to trap Jesus in their questions. He handled that wonderfully. Then Jesus asks his own question. And if you were with us last week, you saw that then Jesus turned to his disciples with everyone else listening. And he said, hey, you need to beware. You need to beware of these con artists. They're coming after you. They are not to be trusted. These religious leaders have something up their sleeve. Jesus knew it. The disciples were starting to understand it. Those who were listening in the crowd are hearing this probably for the first time. But now what happens is Jesus has left the inner courts of the temple. He can't go in the actual temple because he's not a priest, but he's in the inner courts where the men are allowed to worship. He's stepping out of the temple, the inner temple courts, to what's called the women's court. And he enters that and he sees something. He sees something that warms his soul. And what I want to do today is let you know ahead of time, before we even jump into the text, we are going to be talking about giving resources back to God. Most people do not enjoy this conversation, but I will tell you, as the pastor, I enjoy it less than you. I enjoy it less than you because I don't like to talk about it. But this one's different. This one's different because it has nothing to do with are you giving or are you not. It has everything to do with your faith and with your heart. And I love to talk about those two things. I don't like to talk about giving, but I love to talk about faith and heart. And that's what Jesus is going to see exemplified in the women's court in such a way that he stops and teaches his disciples. So that's where we're going today. Everyone take a deep breath and let's dive in together. First, we need to talk about the offering system itself. Luke chapter 21, verse 1. As Jesus looked up, he saw the rich people, the rich ones, putting their gifts into the temple treasury. So where they're located is called the women's court, but it's also called the treasury. It's where offerings were made. So he's walking out of the inner courts and he's seeing all these people during the Passover festival making their contributions to the temple, therefore to God. So that's what he's seeing. Mark gives us a little bit more. I think it's important to read that. Mark chapter 12, verse 41, it says this. Jesus sat down, actually. He sat down at a vantage point. He sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts of money, okay? Specifically, many coins, and we'll see why in just a minute. Now, within this treasury or the women's court, there were 13 shofar, which is like a big trumpet, shofar chests, offering boxes. There were 13 of those placed along the southern wall. They were all right there. Everyone could see it. So Jesus heads over to the north wall, we can assume, and he sits down and he just wants to watch. He wants to watch what is going to transpire, who's going to give, what they're going to give. He wants to see this. Of those 13 boxes, think just like our offering boxes, only bigger and with a big old trumpet on the top of it. 6 of them were for free will offerings. You could give whatever you wanted back to God there. That's what they were there for. Those contributions, they went directly to the temple and therefore to God. Just like when you give to Summit Church, yes, you're giving to the church, but you're giving to God. No different. 7 of the trumpet, shofar, offering box setups were for specific types of offerings. Now, those would change from time to time, because the temple would say, we're raising money for this. And if you want to give towards it, go ahead. Think of a building campaign at a church. Think of any number of different things. We've raised money for camp this year. I stand up and say, hey, we want to do this for Project Christmas. It's no different. They had 7 boxes that were for specific types of offering. Now, one of them was always for the leftover money after you made a sin offering. If you had change left over, you weren't supposed to put that in your pocket. You were supposed to still give that back to God because of the sin you had committed. So one of them was always for the leftover change of the sin offerings. The rich people, as Jesus observed, would make a huge spectacle out of their giving. They wanted everyone to know who they were and what they were giving. They wanted to make sure as they threw in their huge amount of coins that it just made a obnoxious sound as it went through the trumpet, as it went through this bronze hoop that funneled down into the box. It reverberated out across the entire temple. They wanted to make sure everybody heard. So, I mean, picture this, like bagfuls of money just being poured into this amplifier so that everybody knows I'm giving a lot and you should be paying attention to this. When I think about it, though, I wonder this. This is me being crazy, okay? But I wonder if there was like a jackpot siren on our offering box that went off every time someone gave more than $1,000. If you put a $5 bill in there, nothing. But if you put a $1,000 check in there, you put $1,000 worth of cash in there, what if you put $1,000 in that offering box, if a huge siren went off so that everyone in the church would know that you just gave $1,000 or more, would any of you be tempted? Would any of you be tempted just to maybe do it once? Just so that everyone would turn their heads and look at you and go, huh, look at that person. Baller. Just giving a ton of money. That's what the rich people were doing. And that's what Jesus was observing. And Jesus doesn't like that kind of giving. I just want you to know, if you gave just to hear the siren go off, if you gave just so the people would hear the coins clanging down the trumpet, Jesus doesn't like that kind of giving. He talks about this in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6, verse 2. When you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets. He's talking about the 13 boxes in the temple. Don't make a bunch of noise about it. That's how the hypocrites do it in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men. They want everyone to know what they give. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. Everyone knows what they gave. Everyone thinks they're awesome. That is their reward. But God is not impressed. God is not impressed with those who give just to get the attention of man. And then Jesus sees a widow, and he sees her offering. And it's going to kind of change the whole perspective of the day. Luke chapter 21, verse 2. He also saw a poor widow. Okay, so amongst all the rich people dumping in their bags full of coins, he saw a widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Mark adds that they were worth a fraction of a penny. This was not a large sum of money. This was as small as it gets. Luke calls the widow poor. He identifies her as being in poverty. Maybe, just maybe, we don't know this, she's one of the ones who had her house devoured by the religious leaders that we talked about last week. Maybe she was the one who got fleeced by the shepherd. But yet she still comes back to worship, and she still gives what she can. She wants as little attention as possible because her gift consists of 2 lepta. Lepta are the smallest Greek currency. They are like our penny. We don't have a smaller currency than a penny. They're similar to that. It was worth 1/16 of a denarii, or a denarius, 1/64 of a day's wage. So in our money today, it's not equal to a penny, but in our money today, it'd be about $2. There are people giving gifts of hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, and she gave a gift of $2. Now, oftentimes in Greek literature, those coins that she gave, the lepta, they're referred to as mites because they come from the Greek word to peel off. Literally, these coins were taken out of other coins. They were the shavings off of other coins. And that's what she had to give. And that's what she gave. Yet her gift given in embarrassment and almost secrecy, was met with public praise by Jesus. Luke chapter 21, verses 3 and 4. Truly, truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow, Jesus admits she's poor, this poor woman has put in more than all the others, than everyone else who made a big show out of dumping a big bag of coins in there. She's given more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, out of having nothing, put in all that she had to live on. Now, it is important to note here that she did not give her life savings on that day. She gave the money that she would have lived on for that day. She gave everything she had for that day. Her equivalent of $2 is all that she had to live for that day, and she gave it all. Now, Mark tells us that Jesus spoke these words only to his disciples, but Luke does not clarify that. So I think there's obviously others who are listening at this moment. And I want you to think just for a second, if it was just the disciples, as Jesus has just witnessed this amazing sacrificial gift. He calls his disciples over. He's still reeling from the time he had with the religious leaders. They're still kind of figuring out what happened, and they're excited now. They're excited to hear what Jesus has to say. They want to know, what do you want to teach us now, Lord? We're in it. Jesus is no longer frustrated by the religious leaders. In fact, he is elated by the faith and the generosity of this woman. Now, how and why does that get Jesus so excited? What about this gift makes Jesus go, guys, come here. I can't believe what I just saw. It was the widow's, sacrificial generosity. She gave when she had nothing to give, but she gave because of the love that she has for God. And that same sacrificial generosity is what is going to propel Jesus here in just 3 days to the cross. He is going to sacrifice himself for us. Sacrificial generosity. He sees a perfect illustration of it in this widow, and he wants his disciples to hear about it, to make sure they didn't miss it, to get the lesson. Now, having concluded that text, how do you and I get this same kind of faithful heart? The same kind of heart and faith that this widow has. How do we get that? Well, I think there's 2 steps, and they're not easy. And I'll tell you that right now. I think there's 2 steps, and they're not easy. The first one, step number 1, we need to find joy in giving. That's the heart component. We need to find joy in sacrificially giving. It's not easy, but we must do it. There was a group of Christians in the first century that found it. Their story is recorded in 2 Corinthians 8, verses 1 through 4. Paul writes, "And now, brothers, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonians." The Macedonians were a group of churches in the region of Macedonia. That was Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. So within those 3 groups, you have the book of Philippians and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. You have Berea mentioned multiple times in the book of Acts. But here's what's interesting about these churches, the Macedonian churches. They were heavily persecuted from their conception. From the very beginning, they were persecuted. They were required to lose everything. Their businesses, their families, their community. It was all stripped from them because they chose to follow Jesus. Because they were so heavily persecuted, they were also incredibly poor. This was an incredibly poor group of churches. But look at verse 2. Paul writes, out of the most severe trials, what they went through, we can't imagine, their overflowing joy, the joy that came out of sorrow, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. That doesn't add up to me. Incredible trials, incredible poverty, and a joy in the heart produced generosity. And here's what I think it means. We don't have much anyway, but we got God. Might as well give what little we have left back to God and do so joyously, because we're never going to be rich. We're never going to have it all, but at least we can have Him. I think that's what that means. Verse 3, for I testify, Paul writing, that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability. They gave more than they could. Entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us, Paul and Timothy, they pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the saints. What Paul was doing at this point, he was collecting an offering to take back to the church in Jerusalem. And he was going from church to church asking for money. And this, the poorest of the poor church, was the one that joyfully gave to this offering. They were the ones who gave the most. Why? Because they loved God. They'd experienced His grace. They'd chosen to follow Him even though it meant adversity for their life. It meant trials and suffering and hardship. And so when Paul comes in and goes, I'm collecting an offering, he's like, I don't even feel good asking for it from you. They said, no. We can give. We can give. We don't have much, but we can give what we've got. And they gave. And some of them even gave beyond their ability. That's the joy that comes from giving. Now, you also have a second piece here. How do we have this faith in this heart, the same faith and heart of the widow? Then we need to trust God for our provision. That's faith. That's the faith part. So you have the heart and the faith. How do we trust God for our provision? The widow gave all that she had for that day. She could not provide for herself any longer for that day a meal. She couldn't rent a room. She couldn't travel. But in joy, she gave it all. She gave it all, knowing that God would take care of her, knowing that God would provide. The Bible is clear. The Bible is very clear in the Old Testament. You are not to give away all of your resources, because then you become a burden on someone else. But Jesus is clear that there's a joy that comes from sacrificially giving. And that's what this widow did. She gave all that she had for that day. Church, we can't truly say we trust God. We can't truly say that. I trust God completely. We cannot make that statement until we've been placed in a situation where we have to trust God. You have to walk that walk before you can say, I trust God completely. I want you to realize that I'm not asking you right now to do something crazy. I'm asking you to look at your heart. Because the people that I know who have the heart of generosity, they give first, they give faithfully, and they give a bunch back to God. They do that. And they worry about the math later. Those are the people that I know that find the most joy in giving. They realize, hey, this math doesn't add up, but I've committed to giving back to God this much, and I'm going to do so. And if at the end of the month it's not there, I know He's going to provide. I can tell you time and time again from my life that the math didn't add up. But since I was challenged in my early 20s to be a person who faithfully gives, I have seen God provide in ways that I would never have seen had I not chosen to faithfully obey Him, had I not chosen to sacrificially give to Him. Now, Here's the biggest statement I can make. Should you choose to faithfully, generously, sacrificially, from the heart, give to God, I want you to know this. This is His promise. This is His promise. There will always be enough. There will always be enough. That's His promise to you. So, what if you want to live this way? Okay, Todd, I'll try it. What do I need to do? I want to live this way. Well, you don't just immediately jump in. It is a heart thing. So you need to start to walk with God down this road. It starts with a heart that is extremely generous and a faith that truly believes that God will provide. Those are the things that you need to foster. And there's ways to do that. And I'll kind of lead you through it by asking some questions. First question. Do you really trust God to provide? Somewhere deep down, do you believe that if the math doesn't add up, if I give this, I'm going to be short this, and I believe that God is going to provide? Do you really believe that? Here's the cool thing. You can try it, and this is the one area in the Bible where God says to test Him. We're not really supposed to test God. But in Malachi chapter 3, God says, test me in this. Bring your offerings to the storehouse, bring your giving to the church, and test me in this and see if I don't open up the floodgates of heaven. See if by your faithfulness I do not pour out blessing upon you. Test me in it. I'm a big God. I can handle it. He says this, but if you are struggling right now to believe that God really will provide, then the only way you're going to find out, yes or no, is by trying, is by stepping out in faith and doing it. I want you to do this for your own heart and your own faith. Second question, do you give? Do you give from your own resources? I'm not talking to Summit. I'm just saying in general. Are you generous? Are you generous or are you stingy going, I need this. I have to have all of this. Are you opportunistic in your giving? If I do this, then maybe I'll earn some favor with this sports team because I gave to their booster club, or maybe I'll earn favor with this school, or maybe whatever. Are you opportunistic in your giving, or are you generous in your giving? Do you give so that you will receive? Or do you give because you find joy in giving? That's the difference. Are you fearful? Are you fearful that if you give, you won't have enough? Or are you confident and faithful that even if I give, when the math doesn't line up, it'll be there? Do you love to give, church? Do you love it? Is it something that brings you great joy? Or do you give under compulsion? Like, for instance, this talk. I don't want to give, but Todd, you're telling me I have to give, so I'll write a check. I don't care. I don't know. Don't give. If that's you, don't give. Please don't do that. Don't give because you've been forced to give, or because you feel guilty, or like I'm telling you have to. Give because you want to. Give because of your heart and your faith. It's all about your heart. That's the underlying current of this message. It's all about your heart. It has nothing really to do with money. It has everything to do with your heart and with your faith. Those are the things that really matter to God. So today, as you respond to this message, respond in a way that God desires, with a generous heart. A heart that requires faith, yes, because it's a big one, but respond with your heart. The heart and the faith of a giver is never about the size of the gift. Okay? It has nothing to do with how many zeros are on the end of that check. And that's the primary reason why I do not ever look at the giving here at this church. I see the total, but I don't know who gave what. And for this reason, I'm not God. Someone today could give $25 to the church, to God, and someone could give $25,000 to God. And if I knew who gave what, the $25 gift would probably just be relegated to, oh, that was nice. And the $25,000 gift would be like, oh, that's something special. We may need to write him a card or something. But what if the person who gave the $25 gave truly out of sacrifice? What if they didn't have $25 to give, but they gave because they wanted to give to God and they wanted to see that God would provide for them. They wanted to be generous and sacrificial. What if that person really gave the gift that would honor God, and the person that gave the $25,000, for them it was just something for show. I wanted to see if it would make a ripple. What if that was the case? That's why I don't see it, because I'm not God. I mean, God would know that the person who gave the $25 gave the greater gift, just like the widow did in the temple courts that day. She gave out of her poverty. She gave when she had nothing to give. She gave because she wanted to give to God, while the rich people gave just so they could hear the coins clink in the trumpets. God can see the heart behind the gift. He can see the sacrifice. And that's why Jesus knew on this day that that woman gave more than everyone else, because she gave everything she could give. She gave everything she had for that day. This is not a doctrine-forming sermon on giving, okay? It's not. It's not how, we don't have to walk into a temple and give everything we have for that day. That's not what it's saying, but it is an illustrative passage of faith and heart. And so, church, how will you respond? How will you respond today in faith and with your heart to the call of God to be generous, because He has been generous to you? Father, help us to give freely to those in need. Help us to give back to you, Lord, for you are worthy. Help us to see who you are and what you've done. We are a people that desires nothing more than to honor you. So help us do that through our heart and our faith, and specifically in our giving. May it be generous. May it be sacrificial. May it be glorifying to you. May it help those who are in need. And God, may it build your kingdom. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.